The story of Star vs. the Force of Evil is a tragic one that most of us are likely familiar with at this point. Once upon a time, Star vs. the Force of Evil was this fun, creative show about the off-the-wall misadventures of a magical princess from another dimension and her not-at-all transgender best friend as they fight, well, the forces of evil. Along the way, the show would become more serialized and war-driven, telling darker stories that built upon an engaging overarching narrative, all while still maintaining its fun tone. For a while, Star vs. the Force of Evil was one of the most loved cartoons of the 2010s. Then Season 4 happened and everything kind of went to hell. While it's generally agreed upon that Star vs. was starting to show cracks in its third season, namely due to the increased focus on the awful Starco shipping drama, it still had plenty of fans, myself included. Season 4 on the other hand, you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone willing to defend that train wreck. Why is Season 4 so widely despised? Well, let's see. Starco had completely taken over the plot, leaving the main narrative feeling underdeveloped and unfocused. Star and Marco were made into self-centered jerks who were awful to their romantic partners. Numerous plot threads were dropped without resolution. Ponyhead was still a thing for some reason. The villains sucked. The final conflict only happened because everyone decided to be idiots for the sake of the plot. And it all ends with Star stopping a genocide by causing a far bigger genocide against all magical beings in the infinite multiverse, and dragging both Earth and Muni into chaos. So yeah, not the best note to end on. I swear, I've never seen animation fans selectively turn on a show like they did Star vs. the Force of Evil. This series went from being a critical darling to a complete joke practically overnight. I'm telling you, Star vs. Season 4 was so bad that it ruined the entire show for me as well as for a whole lot of fans. Now I know this sounds like an exaggeration, and that's because it kind of is to some extent. Honestly, looking at the show from a strictly objective standpoint, I'd consider Star vs. in its entirety to be a 6 out of 10 at worst. However, the final stretch of Star vs. is so awful that it honestly makes me never want to revisit this series ever again. While there are plenty of shows like Danny Phantom and the Boondocks that are still fondly remembered, despite seeing a massive dip in quality in their final seasons, in those cases, the final seasons could simply be ignored or skipped over. Star vs., on the other hand, doesn't have this luxury due to its heavily serialized nature. Star vs. Season 4 was more than just a bad final season of a show. It was a bad conclusion to a years-long narrative. Everything in seasons 1 through 3 was building up to this, and because of that, this godforsaken season can't simply be ignored. Yes, the show still has way more good episodes than it does bad, but I personally can't revisit any of them without thinking about how many of the show's characters will become insufferable, how a ton of storylines it was foreshadowing will never be fully realized, and how it's all doomed to end on a wet fart of a conclusion. However, out of all the good things that were tainted by the awful direction Star vs. Season 4 went in, the thing that will always frustrate/fascinate me the most was how it negatively affected the central antagonist of the show, Toffee. Toffee had all of the makings of an amazing villain. He was suave, ruthless, manipulative, and wore a nice suit. However, despite being utilized well in the show's first 3 seasons, there were creative decisions made in the final season that led Toffee to end up feeling kind of weak in the grand scheme of things. Which is why instead of complaining about Starco, or discussing the really uncomfortable implications of the series finale like every other video on Star vs., I want to talk about how I think the show completely squanders Toffee's character. But wait, Sockman, I hear you ask. Why are you talking about Star vs. when no one cares about it anymore? Wouldn't it be better for the algorithm to talk about an actually relevant cartoon like The Owl House? And to that I say, I'm not very good at YouTube. I'm already regretting this. Let's start off by discussing who exactly Toffee is. Toffee is a calm, calculating, menacing figure shrouded in mystery, who's strangely knowledgeable of both magic and the butterfly family. His debut midway through Season 1 would signal a major shift in the status quo of Star vs., and led the way to the serialized storytelling and more serious tone that'd be present from Season 2 onwards. Unlike Ludo and his posse, there's no humor to be found in Toffee. He's a ruthless chess master who effortlessly plays everyone from human to monster like fiddles, in service of his ultimate goal, to destroy all magic. His twisted plans nearly come to fruition before finally being stopped by Star at the end of the epic 8-part Season 3 opener, Battle for Muni. However, before perishing, Toffee leaves Star with these chilling final words: "Only I know how this all turns out." With those parting words, it was very clear that even in death, Toffee had a plan already in motion, and that this wouldn't be the last we see of him. After all, there were still so many questions surrounding him, like what did he plan to accomplish by destroying magic? What was his motivation? How does he know so much about the Butterfly family? And what plans does he have for Marco? Toffee was a villain brimming with mystery and intrigue, so of course fans waited with bated breath for him to make his grand return, and for the show to finally tell us who Toffee really is. And come season 4, all those questions and more were finally answered, giving us a truly complex, multi-layered villain who, just kidding, he never comes back.
It turns out you did. Surprise!
Even though the very cryptic message he left at the end of Battle for Muni practically screamed, "Toffee will return," and the show is clearly setting up some sort of dynamic between him and Marco in Storm the Castle, he's completely absent from the plot of Season 4. Granted, Meteor's lesson does give us a brief glimpse into Toffee's past, but he's there for 2 minutes and the episode literally adds nothing to his character. He breaks Glosstric's arm for no other reason than to be a jerk, he gets bodied by an infant, he mentions how dangerous magic is, and that's it. That's all this glimpse into Toffee's past tells us about him. We're given no further details. All that mystery and build-up surrounding Toffee, all of the hints that there was something deeper going on with him, all of the foreshadowing that he had even bigger plans, amounted to literally nothing. This is the main reason why Toffee's become more divisive over the years. So much of what Starversus was seemingly setting up with Toffee never really goes anywhere. Despite the writers telling us that Toffee's a complex villain, the show doesn't give us any insight into his character or motives. All the series gives us about Toffee is that he's a manipulative jerk, and not much else. The closest thing we're given to any sort of motive behind his actions is that he really wanted his missing finger back. This total lack of information on who Toffee is and what drives him leads him to come across as a shallow, petty villain who goes out in a pretty anticlimactic way. But wait, I hear you shout. Isn't Toffee's whole deal that he's a well-intentioned extremist who only wanted to fight back against the anti-monster discrimination in Muni? Well, that's technically true, as confirmed by one of the writers who directly compared him to Magneto. However, the issue here is that this motive is never communicated within the show itself. While the fandom loves to characterize Toffee as this noble villain who only wanted what was best for his fellow monsters, there isn't anything in Starversus the Forces of Evil that indicates he's remotely concerned about monster kind. Starversus does literally nothing to give Toffee any semblance of humanity, or provide him with any sort of sympathetic traits. Two things that are very important if you want to make a well-intentioned anti-villain in the same vein as Magneto. Toffee's only ever portrayed as a cold-hearted manipulator who treats people as mere pawns in his game. Nothing more, nothing less. A common argument against claims that Toffee doesn't have anything in the way of depth or clear character motivation is that the tie-in book, The Magic Book of Spells, actually gives us some insight on him, with the reveal that he became the monster we all know him as today, due to being radicalized by the outright genocidal and even more monstrous Seth. Granted, it isn't a lot, and the book still leaves a ton of blank spaces in Toffee's character and backstory, but it's at least something, I guess? Except, why is it that this important information in regards to the main villain's motives can only be found in supplementary material? In fact, the Magic Book of Spells was always super bizarre to me. While I'm always down for material that expands upon a show's world, the Magic Book of Spells does more than give additional background details. It touches upon very crucial information about the lore of Starverse and the Force of Evil that you'd think would be mentioned in the show itself, but is never even alluded to. For example, despite the book portraying Seth as a key figure in the lore of Starverse, he's never shown or mentioned even once in the show. The book even explicitly raises the possibility of Seth still being alive, which anyone reading would think was foreshadowing his appearance in the show proper as a major player. But again, this goes absolutely nowhere. There's also this one segment where it's heavily implied that Eclipsa and Toffee were an item at some point. A very important piece of information that raises even more questions as to what exactly Toffee's whole deal is. But just like Seth, this relationship is never alluded to within the show, and this potential bit of foreshadowing goes absolutely nowhere. Honestly, with the amount of plot-crucial information and blatant foreshadowing in the Magic Book of Spells that goes completely ignored by the show, I personally have trouble taking its contents with anything more than a grain of salt. This book feels less like an expansion of Starversus lore, and more so a peek behind the curtain as to what the staff originally had in mind for Season 4. And like most of the seemingly crucial lore details that go completely unaddressed in the show proper, I personally view what little additional characterization and backstory Toffee's given here as a glimpse at the character he was originally supposed to be, rather than canon details about his character. So yeah, at the end of the day, we still know jack squat about this guy. The thing about all of this is that Toffee being a basic, petty villain with vague motivations wouldn't be so bad if that were the direction the show wanted to take with him from the start. Just look at Slade from the 2003 Teen Titans cartoon. He's easily one of my favorite villains of all time, and we never learn a single thing about him or his motives. While both Slade and Toffee are remarkably similar characters, both being stoic, sociopathic manipulators, the difference between these two is intent. Teen Titans never wanted Slade to be a sympathetic or multi-layered villain. They wanted a terrifying, mysterious figure who solely exists to make life harder for the Titans. The entire point of Slade was for him to be this boogeyman whose vagueness only adds to his menace. Meanwhile, I'm not entirely sure how Star vs. wants me to feel about Toffee. They were very clearly setting something up with him, and had an apparent desire to make Toffee more than just some jerk, but his character never really went anywhere. The lack of answers behind Slade was to be expected and add to his appeal, whereas with Toffee, answers to him were very much hinted at and expected, so Star vs. failing to deliver on that front detracts from Toffee's character. Slade has a clear identity, while Star vs. never figured out who Toffee even is. Which leads me to ask, what exactly happened here? What could have possibly gone down behind the scenes to lead Star vs. the Force of Evil to abandon its main villain before his story could even be complete? My guess is that the writers simply wrote themselves into a corner and couldn't figure out how to bring Toffee back after he beefed it in Battle of Muni, which may have led to a domino effect that forced them to abandon all of their original plans for Season 4 that were foreshadowed in previous seasons as well as in the Magic Book of Spells. While it's pure speculation on my part, I don't think it's that much of a stretch given that a similar thing happened with Monster Arm, a one-off villain from Season 1. The end of his titular episode deliberately sets up Monster Arm to return in the future, and the show would hint more than once that he'd come back in a big way, only for him to never show up again. The show's creator Darren Nefsey even confirmed that they had future plans for Monster Arm, but the staff simply couldn't find a way to bring him back. And you cannot tell me Monster Arm wasn't somehow integral to whatever plan Toffee had for Marco. Seriously, what were they planning here with those two? This one interaction between them has been driving me nuts since I started working on this video. They were planting the seeds for a deeper dynamic here, but it doesn't go anywhere. Toffee clearly takes some sort of interest in Marco here and sees him as valuable to his plans, but it's just never mentioned again. They just do not interact ever again. Were they setting up Marco to do a heel turn? Was either Toffee or Monster Arm going to pull Bellows and possess him? There was a really interesting dynamic here that could have made for a great source of conflict in Season 4, but for whatever reason, they just threw it all away for Starko angst, fantasy racism, and freaking Mina Loveberry. No one likes Mina Loveberry. Why is she the villain now? Seth was right there. Season 4, why are you like this? You... Did I mention that I don't like Season 4? Because I really don't. With all that said, despite all of my complaining, I wouldn't go as far as to call Toffee a straight up bad villain. Toffee's still a genuinely intimidating figure who works well as an antagonistic force, but not so much as a character. Which sucks, because Toffee could have very easily been up there with the greats like Phil Cypher and King Andreas. But he's ultimately undermined by a complete lack of closure to his story, and unfulfilled promises of there being more to him than just some evil guy. More than anything, I just find Toffee to be an underwhelming character whose potential was completely squandered. Star vs. was setting up something very interesting with Toffee, and I truly do believe that Season 4 was meant to be the point where all of that build-up surrounding him would finally pay off. However, for some reason, the crew were forced to abandon Toffee, alongside whatever promising storyline they were building up to, leaving us with a lackluster, disappointing villain.
You're a disappointment.
Yeah? Well, you're boring. And you dress like a lawyer.
The reason why I chose to focus on Toffee, and not just do an entire takedown on Season 4 as a whole, is because 1, I value my sanity, and 2, I feel that Toffee is perfectly emblematic of my feelings towards Star vs. the Forces of Evil as a whole. Star vs. was great for the majority of its run, and promised that everything was leading to something even greater beyond the horizon. And just like Toffee, the show fumbled the bag so hard when it was time to make good on its promises, that it ended up tainting my entire experience with the series. When all was said and done, both Toffee and Star vs. itself left me feeling cheated. Cheated out of what the first 3 seasons led me to believe was going to be an engaging storyline with a satisfying conclusion. All of those years that I spent invested in these characters and this story, it just kind of felt like it was all for nothing. I know the saying goes, it's about the journey, not the destination, but just like the show he's from, Toffee is living proof that sometimes the destination is so lackluster that it invalidates the journey getting there. Well, that got kind of depressing. Anyway, if you still think Toffee's a cool villain, or still enjoy Star vs., that's great. And also, I actually envy you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go back to my blissful existence of not caring about Star vs. the Force of Evil anymore, because complaining about this show really takes a toll on you. Also, Tomko and Janstar should have been endgame. You know I'm right!